Hey, so glad you got here. We were totally waiting for you, just about to listen to a story. Tonight, the wind carries the smell of damp earth, old campfires and rain-soaked leaves, the sort of night when every distant hill seems to hide something that wasn't there before, somewhere beyond the last familiar village, where moonlight stretches over forgotten fields like spilled silver. There is said to be a road that refuses to exist beneath the sun. Convenient, really, if you're the sort of road that dislikes being judged in daylight. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're settling in, I'd love to hear where you're listening from and what the local hour is where you are. It's always fascinating to imagine these stories drifting across so many hearths at once. Now, settle in, get comfortable, and just relax. Today's tale starts like this. There once lived a man named Aldrin, a cloth merchant whose greatest talent was arriving somewhere just after everyone else had left. He never meant for that to happen. Life simply had a habit of delaying him. One broken cartwheel here, one particularly stubborn mule there, one village elder determined to explain the history of every nearby tree before allowing visitors to leave. By the time Aldrin escaped conversations like those, the daylight usually had 1 foot below the horizon. This evening proved nitrogen monoxide different. The last villagers he had passed insisted he should remain until dawn. "No one travels east tonight," an old woman had muttered, while arranging bundles of onions with the seriousness of a royal advisor discussing war. Aldrin had smiled politely. Merchants smiled politely, because customers bought more cloth from cheerful people than nervous ones. "I've walked plenty of roads after dark." The woman only shook her head. "You've walked roads." She never explained the difference. That sentence lingered in his thoughts longer than he cared to admit. The ordinary road wound through low hills where sheep had grazed only hours before. Dry stone walls followed the path like old companions, and clusters of oak trees whispered together whenever the breeze found them. The moon climbed higher. Then something peculiar happened. The road widened. Not gradually, not naturally. One blink revealed the narrow dirt track. The next revealed smooth, pale stones stretching far beyond either edge, almost glowing beneath the moonlight. Aldrin stopped walking. His mule stopped too, mostly because IT preferred copying him whenever uncertain. The animal possessed a practical wisdom of someone avoiding unnecessary surprises. If mules could vote, they'd probably reject adventures altogether. He looked behind. The ordinary road remained exactly as before. Ahead, something entirely different waited. The pale roadway curved gently into mist. That had not existed a few moments earlier. Nitrogen monoxide fresh cart marks. Nitrogen monoxide horse tracks. Only smooth stone reflecting moonlight. He crouched and touched its surface. Cold, perfectly dry despite the evening dew that made nitrogen monoxide sense. As every sensible medieval traveler knew, if something impossible appeared in front of you, the proper response was usually to walk the other way. Unfortunately, merchants also knew that walking backward often meant arriving late, and lateness was almost as frightening as magic. Almost. Aldrin rose slowly. His mule refused to move. The animal planted all 4 hooves with admirable determination. "I see." The mule blinked. "I appreciate your opinion." Another blink, very persuasive. Still nothing. with an exaggerated sigh worthy of a village actor performing a tragic king. Aldrin untied the packs and continued on foot, promising himself he would return if the road became any stranger. It became stranger after roughly 20 steps. The sounds disappeared. Crickets, gone. Wind, gone. Even his boots seemed quieter. The silence settled around him like thick wool. It wasn't frightening exactly, only complete. His breathing suddenly sounded far louder than breathing ought to sound. He glanced upward. The stars appeared unusually sharp. Ancient travelers often believed certain roads belonged more to the heavens than to the earth. Some claimed the brightest moonlit paths mirrored invisible routes walked by wandering spirits, while others insisted that particular stretches of land simply remembered older worlds. Such tales usually earned amused smiles during market days, yet became strangely convincing once darkness surrounded a lone traveler. Aldrin wished he'd laughed harder at those stories. Far ahead, figures emerged. 3 travelers. They walked at an even pace. None carried lanterns, ODD. Most sensible people preferred seeing where wolves might be hiding. As they approached, Aldrin raised one hand. "Good evening." No reply. Perhaps they hadn't heard. He tried again. "Fine weather for traveling." Still silence. The nearest traveler wore a heavy hood. Another leaned on a walking staff, polished, smooth with age. The third carried what appeared to be an empty birdcage that was unusual enough to deserve questions. Instead, they simply passed him, not rudely, not hurriedly. They merely continued walking with calm expressions fixed somewhere beyond the horizon. None met his eyes, none acknowledged his presence. It felt less like being ignored and more like standing beside a river that never noticed rocks beneath its current. He watched them disappear into the mist behind him. Only then did he realize something unsettling. He had heard nitrogen monoxide footsteps. Not one. His own boots echoed faintly. Theirs had produced nothing at all. A cool shiver wandered down his back. Still, curiosity remained stronger than fear. Curiosity has always been responsible for remarkable discoveries and absolutely terrible decisions. Sometimes, both at once. The pale road continued across rolling fields, unlike any Aldrin remembered. The hills seemed softer somehow, almost painted rather than grown. Ash trees lined portions of the path, their pale trunks gleaming under the moon. Several branches carried ribbons, white ribbons, dozens, perhaps hundreds. They stirred, despite the absence of wind. Nitrogen monoxide birds nested there. Nitrogen monoxide insects buzzed nearby. Only those ribbons, dancing gently in invisible currents. His grandmother had once mentioned an old custom from distant villages. Travelers would tie bits of cloth to sacred trees, hoping wandering souls would pause to examine the offering rather than follow the traveler home. Whether anyone truly believed it worked hardly mattered. Customs often survived because people preferred tiny comforts over impossible risks. Aldrin suddenly wished he carried spare ribbon instead of expensive wool. Far ahead, the faint outline of a building slowly emerged through the silver haze. A roof, a chimney, warm light shining from windows. An inn. Relief washed across him so suddenly he laughed aloud. Of course, a roadside inn explained everything. Someone would know. This strange paving, Someone would explain why silent travelers wandered beneath moonlight. Someone would certainly know why H.I. as Mule had displayed better judgment than he had. He quickened his pace. The warm glow flickered invitingly. Somewhere, in the distance, just barely audible through the impossible silence, a single bell rang once. Its note drifted across the moonlit fields like a warning too patient to hurry. Aldrin slowed. Without knowing why, he counted his own heartbeat until the sound faded completely. Then, drawing a careful breath, he continued toward the waiting inn, unaware that before the night was over, he would begin questioning whether every road lead travelers to destinations or whether some roads existed only to discover who was willing to follow them. The inn stood exactly where IT had seemed to stand from a distance, neither closer nor farther than expected, which somehow felt like the most reassuring thing Aldrin had experienced all evening. Its windows glowed with warm amber light. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney. A wooden sign creaked gently above the doorway, except there was nothing painted on IT, not a single letter, not a faded symbol, only smooth wood polished by years of weather. Convenient, Aldrin muttered. Now if someone asks where I spent the night, I'll simply tell them I stayed at the place with the roof. His own joke sounded unusually loud. The silence of the road seemed unwilling to laugh. As he reached the doorway, he glanced behind him. The pale road stretched away beneath the moon exactly as before. Nitrogen monoxide sign of his mule. Nitrogen monoxide sign of the three silent travelers. Only silver mist curling lazily over the stones. He pushed open the heavy oak door. Warmth welcomed him first, then the smell. Fresh bread, stew simmering, somewhere unseen. Wood smoke, dried herbs hanging from the rafters. IT smelled exactly like every respectable roadside inn should smell, as though the building had made a determined effort to reassure every nervous traveler who crossed its threshold. A handful of guests sat scattered around sturdy wooden tables. Some quietly ate. Others stared into cups. A gray-haired woman carefully stitched a torn sleeve. Near the hearth, an elderly man slowly carved tiny wooden birds with remarkable patience. Everything appeared ordinary, almost. Nitrogen monoxide one spoke. Not one conversation. Not one laugh. Not even the familiar clatter of travelers exchanging exaggerated stories that grew more heroic with every refill of ale. An inn without chatter felt rather like a bakery without bread. Possible, perhaps, but deeply suspicious. Aldrin approached the keeper, standing behind the counter. The broad-shouldered man looked neither old nor young. His face possessed the peculiar quality of seeming familiar, despite belonging to nitrogen monoxide. One Aldrin could remember meeting. Good evening. The innkeeper smiled warmly. Good evening. At last, someone answered. I was beginning to wonder whether everyone along this road had taken a vow of silence. They have not. I see. You've arrived early. Aldrin blinked. Early? For someone walking this road. That explained absolutely nothing. Still smiling, the innkeeper filled a wooden cup with watered wine and slid it across the counter. Nitrogen monoxide charge. IT usually is. Usually? Aldrin decided not to ask. Some questions seemed happier remaining unanswered for a little while. He accepted the drink and found a place near the hearth. The fire crackled pleasantly. Finally. An ordinary sound. He almost sighed with relief. Across the room sat one of the hooded travelers who had passed him earlier. Now, in proper light, the figure appeared entirely human, middle-aged, travel-worn, calm. Perhaps the silence on the road had simply been caution. Aldrin raised his cup politely. Good to see another traveler. The man slowly looked toward him. For several long moments, he simply stared. Then he lowered his gaze again without speaking. Not unfriendly, not angry, merely unavailable. Like someone listening to a distant voice nitrogen monoxide one else could hear. Aldrin leaned back in his chair. So that's how tonight is going. The elderly woodcarver chuckled softly. At least someone appreciated conversation. You speak freely, the old man observed. I generally find it easier than guessing what everyone else is thinking. A useful habit. You disagree? I've lived long enough to know silence often tells longer stories. The old man continued carving. Thin curls of wood drifted onto the floor. His tiny bird already looked ready to fly. You're not from this road, the old man said. No, I thought not. You recognized me? I recognized your questions, Aldrin smiled. Do visitors ask many? They all do. And receive answers? The old man shrugged. Sometimes. He held up the finished bird. Its wings spread gracefully, despite being carved from a single block of ash. You know why birds are carved with open wings? I've never considered IT, because nitrogen monoxide craftsman wishes to imagine them trapped. He placed the little carving beside several others. Each bird faced the window. None faced the room. An odd custom. Then again, medieval craftsmen were wonderfully inventive when creating traditions. Somewhere, someone had probably spent an entire afternoon arguing over the spiritual significance of properly arranged chickens. The innkeeper approached, carrying a bowl of steaming stew. You want food. I didn't order nitrogen monoxide. He set the bowl down anyway. The stew tasted wonderful. Root vegetables, barley, a little smoked meat, nothing. Remarkable. Everything comforting. Exactly the sort of meal that reminded travelers why civilization deserved preserving. As Aldrin ate, more guests quietly entered. None arrived through the front door. He noticed them only once they were already inside. One moment an empty chair stood near the window. The next moment someone occupied IT. Not dramatically. Simply present. Perhaps he'd been distracted. Yes, that must be IT. Long journeys tired the mind. Still, he became increasingly certain that every newcomer wore dusty boots. Yet none tracked mud across the floor. His attention drifted toward the windows. Outside, the moon had climbed even higher. The pale road gleamed, brighter than before. Almost invitingly, the innkeeper followed his gaze. You shouldn't leave until the bell. What bell? You'll hear IT. How often? Only when necessary. Again, with the mysterious answers. Aldrin wondered whether every person here attended the same school of unnecessarily dramatic conversation. Perhaps lessons included long pauses and meaningful staring. Graduation probably required answering simple questions with confusing proverbs. He finished his stew. The bowl somehow seemed full longer than expected. Curious. Perhaps he had eaten more slowly than usual. Across the room, the gray-haired woman who had been sewing finally spoke. Not to anyone present, simply into the room itself. They're blooming early. Several guests quietly nodded. Nitrogen monoxide 1 asked what was blooming. Nitrogen monoxide flowers grew this time of year. The old wood carver carefully set down another tiny bird. They often do before the crossing. Again, gentle nods. Again, nitrogen monoxide explanations. Aldrin looked from face to face. Nitrogen monoxide 1 appeared frightened, only patient, as though waiting for something they had all anticipated for a very long time. Then he noticed the clock. IT hung above the hearth, beautifully crafted. Its single hand never moved. IT pointed permanently to a mark just before midnight. Nitrogen monoxide numbers decorated its face. Only tiny silver stars. Broken? Aldrin asked. The innkeeper glanced upward. No. IT doesn't move. IT doesn't need to. Before Aldrin could form another question, the fire suddenly leaned sideways. Not the smoke, the flames themselves. Every tongue of fire bent toward the front door, as though caught by an invisible wind. Yet the air inside remained perfectly still. Every guest slowly looked toward the entrance. No one seemed surprised. Outside, a single bell rang, deep, clear, ancient. Its sound rolled gently across the silent countryside. Once, twice, 3 times, the hooded traveler nearest the door quietly stood. Then another. Then every guest rose together, not hurriedly, not fearfully, simply because the bell had spoken. The innkeeper met Aldrin's confused expression. His warm smile remained unchanged. The road is calling again. He sighed softly. Without another word, every silent traveler walked toward the door and stepped back into the moonlit night. Aldrin watched them disappear one by one onto the pale stones. None looked back. None hesitated. And despite every sensible instinct urging him to remain exactly where he was, he found himself rising from his chair, drawn toward the doorway by a curiosity that had already begun outweighing common sense. Aldrin stepped out after the others, and the inn door closed behind him with a soft wooden sigh. For one odd moment, he considered turning back. A warm fire remained inside. Food remained inside. A roof remained inside. All excellent arguments. Yet, when he glanced over his shoulder, the inn was already farther away than IT should have been. Not gone. Not quite. But smaller. Dimmer, as if the mist had politely begun removing IT from the world. That is deeply rude, he whispered. The road ahead shone pale and patient. The travelers moved in a loose line, their cloaks stirring though the night remained windless. Aldrin followed at a careful distance, partly because he wanted answers, and partly because being alone on the impossible road seemed worse than walking behind people who behaved like furniture with legs. The bell's final echo faded. Only then did sound return in pieces. A boot scrape, a sleeve rustle, a faint cough from somewhere ahead. Still nitrogen monoxide, proper conversation. The moonlight stretched across the stones so evenly that every shadow looked painted in place. After a while, Aldrin drew level with the gray-haired woman who had been sewing in the inn. She carried the same torn sleeve folded neatly over one arm. "Good evening again," he sighed. She glanced at him. "You shouldn't waste greetings here. I've found them free in most places. Not everything free is harmless." That seemed unnecessarily threatening for a comment about politeness. Aldrin walked beside her anyway. Where are we going? Forward. Yes, I had gathered that much. Then you're learning. She smiled faintly, which was encouraging, or possibly just a warning, wearing friendly clothes. They passed an ash tree covered in white ribbons. Beneath it lay small offerings, a cracked cone, 2 copper pins, a wooden spoon, and a single child's shoe. Aldrin stared. Who leaves a spoon for a road? Someone who knows hunger can follow you farther than wolves. He nodded, as though that made sense. IT did not. But he respected anyone who could say nonsense with confidence. In many towns, that alone could qualify a person for local office. The old woman slowed. Did the innkeeper feed you? Yes. Good. But why? Those who refuse the first kindness often lose the second. The words settled coldly in his stomach. He remembered the stew. Warm, rich, impossibly comforting. Was the food enchanted? Everything here is something. Aldrin sighed. Naturally. Ahead, the hooded traveler with the empty birdcage stopped in the middle of the road. The whole line paused. The cage door swung open. Nothing came out. Of course nothing came out. IT was empty. Then Aldrin heard wings. Soft fluttering. Above him, a dark shape crossed the moon. Then another. Then 7 more. Birds invisible until they moved, like pieces of night remembering they belonged elsewhere. They circled once above the traveler, then vanished into the mist. The cage-bearer closed the little door and resumed walking. Aldrin looked at the sewing woman. Should I ask? No? Will I regret asking? Yes. Excellent. What was that? For the first time, she gave a real laugh. Quiet, but real. Messages to WHOM, those who lost the way. Are birds reliable messengers on this road? More reliable than men. Aldrin could hardly argue with that. Men had invented taxes, border tolls, and tiny decorative buttons nitrogen monoxide one could fasten without swearing. Birds, by comparison, were practically scholars of efficiency. The line of travelers continued until the road dipped into a shallow valley. There, the moonlight dimmed. Not because clouds passed overhead. The sky remained clear. Rather, the road itself seemed to drink less light. At the valley's bottom stood a stone milestone. Its face bore names instead of distances. Hundreds of them. Some carved deep, some nearly worn away. Aldrin stepped closer. The letters shifted. He frowned. One name looked almost familiar. A. Lo. He jerked back before reading further. Do not finish a name you recognize, the sewing woman sighed softly. WHY? Recognition is a hook. Aldrin swallowed. The milestone waited innocently. That was the worst part. Danger should have the manners to look dangerous. At least grow thorns. Perhaps hiss a little. Instead, the stone simply stood there like any roadside marker, quietly collecting names as if that were normal. An eccentric bit of road lore returned to him then. In some villages, people believed milestones could become hungry if travelers complained too much beside them. To prevent this, locals placed crumbs in cracks along the stone, because apparently even haunted geography appreciated snacks. He almost laughed. Almost. Then the hooded traveler nearest the stone reached out and touched one carved name. His body trembled. For a breath, his face changed. Not physically. Aldrin couldn't explain IT. The man simply looked younger, then older, then terribly tired. He whispered something nitrogen monoxide one could hear and stepped away. The name disappeared from the stone. The traveler looked lighter afterward, not happier, only less burdened. The old woman resumed walking. Aldrin hurried after her. What happened? He remembered what he had paid to forget. People pay to forget more often than they admit. That felt uncomfortably true. The valley rose gently toward another stretch of road lined by fields of pale flowers. They had nitrogen monoxide leaves, only slender stems and white blossoms shaped like tiny bells. They're blooming early, Aldrin murmured, remembering the woman at the inn. Yes. What are they? Lantern lily. I've never heard of them. You wouldn't have. They grow where dawn has been delayed. That answer was so beautiful and so worrying that Aldrin decided to keep walking. The flowers gave off a faint scent of honey and rainwater. As the travelers passed, several blossoms tilted toward Aldrin, following him, watching him. He cleared his throat. I dislike attentive flowers. Wise. The road bent around a hill. When Aldrin glanced back, the valley, the milestone, and the lantern lily had vanished. So had the Eden. Behind him stretched only empty moonlit stones disappearing into silver haze. Nitrogen monoxide chimney glow. Nitrogen monoxide signboard. Nitrogen monoxide warm windows. Nothing. Where did I to go? The sewing woman did not turn. Where IT always goes. Which is? Elsewhere. He closed his eyes briefly. Of course. The other travelers moved onward, and now Aldrin noticed something new. Some walked with shadows, some did not. The sewing woman had one. The cage-bearer did not. The hooded man ahead cast a shadow that pointed the wrong direction. This, Aldrin felt, was the sort of detail a person preferred not to notice. Once noticed, however, it became difficult to politely ignore. You are wondering which of you say are alive, the woman sighed. Aldrin nearly tripped. I wasn't going to phrase it sulfur monoxide bluntly, but yes. That depends on where the bell finds US. Aldrin wanted to ask more. He wanted to ask 100 things, but the road ahead suddenly narrowed, and the mist drew aside to reveal dark water stretching across their path. Nitrogen monoxide riverbank. Nitrogen monoxide current. Nitrogen monoxide reeds. Just still. Black water lying over the road like a piece of night laid flat. Beside it waited a small boat, and in that boat stood a ferryman holding a pole that never touched bottom. He lifted his head as the travelers approached. His smile was thin, tired, and patient. One at a time, he called softly, and nitrogen monoxide 1 crosses with more than they can surrender. Aldrin looked down at his empty hands. Then, for the first time since leaving his mule behind, he wondered exactly what he had carried onto the road without knowing. IT. The ferryman stood in his little boat, as though he had been waiting there since the first puddle ever learned ambition. The water stretched across the road, black and still, reflecting the moon without reflecting the stars. That troubled Aldrin more than IT should have. Any water that chose which parts of the sky deserved attention was clearly not interested in honest work. The travelers formed a quiet line. Nitrogen monoxide 1 complained. No one asked the price. Apparently everyone except. Aldrin understood the rules, which was becoming a theme of the evening, and frankly, a little unfair. The hooded man stepped into the boat first. The ferryman held out one hand. The man gave him a small iron key. Nitrogen monoxide words passed between them. The ferryman tucked the key into his coat, pushed away from the edge, and the boat slid over the motionless water without ripple or sound. Aldrin leaned toward the sewing woman. What was the key for? Something locked. That narrows IT beautifully. Perhaps a door, perhaps a promise. Do promises often need keys here? Only the ones people pretend they never made. The boat returned. The cage-bearer crossed next. He surrendered one white feather. Then the old wood carver, who had somehow joined them again without Aldrin noticing, gave up one of his tiny ash birds. The ferryman examined IT with great care. Fine work, not fine enough to fly. Few things are. They crossed. The boat returned once more. The sewing woman stepped forward. Aldrin touched her sleeve lightly. Do you know him? Everyone knows a ferryman eventually. That was not comforting. She reached into her pouch and withdrew a needle. Plain, bright, carefully kept. The ferryman accepted IT with solemn respect. You miss this. I have mended enough. Have you? She looked away. Perhaps not. The boat carried her across. Soon only Aldrin remained. The ferryman waited. The water waited. The moon waited, too. But in a less helpful fashion, Aldrin approached the edge. I seem to have left most of my belongings with my mule. A fortunate mule, the ferryman said. So I have nothing to pay. Everyone has something. Naturally, why would this become simple now? The ferryman extended his hand. Aldrin searched his pockets. A scrap of cord, a dull copper coin, a bit of sealing wax, a folded square of blue cloth used to show customers the color of a larger bolt. He offered the coin. The ferryman did not move. Aldrin offered the wax. Nothing. The cord. Nothing. Finally, he unfolded the blue cloth. IT was small, SOFT, and beautifully dyed the shade of twilight just before the first star appears. The ferryman's eyes lifted. That will do. This? It's only a sample. Nitrogen monoxide. Aldrin frowned. IT had been cut from the first cloth he ever sold on his own. Years ago, when his hand shook so badly, he nearly measured the table instead of the fabric. He had kept the scrap for luck, though he would have denied such sentiment if questioned by anyone with eyebrows. He looked at the cloth resting in his palm. A keepsake, then. A beginning, the ferryman corrected. Aldrin hesitated. The night seemed to lean closer. At last, he placed the blue scrap into the ferryman's hand. The boat shifted gently, inviting him aboard. He stepped in. It should have rocked. IT did not. The ferryman pushed away. The pole slipped into the dark water, though Aldrin never heard it strike bottom. For a while, they drifted in silence. The road behind grew faint. The road ahead remained unseen. Only the boat existed, and the black water and the ferryman whose coat seemed stitched from shadows that had given up trying to belong to anyone. Where does this water come from? Aldrin asked. From places people refuse to cross. That sounds less like geography and more like family trouble. The ferryman smiled. Often the same thing. Aldrin looked over the side. His reflection stared back. Then another reflection appeared beside IT. A younger Aldrin, then an older one, then a version of himself he did not recognize. Tired and hollow-eyed, clutching ledgers as though numbers might save him from loneliness. He looked away quickly. Does everyone see that? Everyone sees what they brought. I brought poor business habits and one questionable sense of direction. You brought more Must we discuss IT? No. Wonderful. But the water will. Of course it would. Aldrin folded his hands tightly. In certain border villages, people once believed that crossings without visible rivers were more dangerous than real rivers, because real water carried bodies while invisible water carried choices. To confuse spirits guarding such places, travelers would wear one sock inside out. Aldrin had always considered that ridiculous. Now he regretted wearing decent socks correctly like an amateur. The boat glided onward. A pale shape moved below the surface. Then another. Not fish. Memories, perhaps. Images drifting under dark glass. A woman laughing beside a market stall. A door closing. A father turning away rather than saying he was proud. Aldrin recognized that last one and felt his throat tighten. The ferryman did not look at him. Merciful, really. Some sorrows deserved privacy, even on impossible roads with nosy water. At last, the boat touched stone. The far side emerged slowly from mist. The travelers waited ahead, gathered beneath a dead willow whose hanging branches never quite touched the ground. Aldrin stepped out. The ferryman held up the blue scrap. Leave lighter? Walk farther. Will I get IT back? No, I suspected that. You may remember IT. That seems a poor exchange. Most exchanges seem poor before they save you. The ferryman pushed away. As the boat receded, Aldrin noticed something impossible. The water behind IT closed not like water, but like a curtain. Within moments, the black crossing vanished entirely. The pale roads stretched uninterrupted behind them. Nitrogen monoxide river. Nitrogen monoxide boat. Nitrogen monoxide ferryman. The sewing woman stood nearby, flexing her empty fingers as though missing the needle already. Did IT hurt? Aldrin asked. Less than keeping IT. He nodded slowly. Ahead, the road climbed toward a rise. Beyond IT, faint lights shimmered. Not the warm glow of an inn, more numerous. Windows, lanterns. A settlement. A settlement. Not the warm glow of an inn, more numerous. Windows, 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 lanterns, a settlement. The travelers began walking. As Aldrin followed, he realized the road had changed again. The pale stones now bore faint carvings, wheels, sheaves of wheat, open hands, closed eyes, tiny crescent moons. The symbols seemed old, older than the villages he knew, older than the king's roads, older, perhaps, than the habit of pretending night was empty. At the top of the rise, the land opened before them. There stood a village beneath the moon. ITS cottages clustered around a square, its roofs silvered with dew, its streets quiet but lit by dozens of blue lanterns. Nitrogen monoxide wall surrounded IT. Nitrogen monoxide watchman guarded IT. Yet Aldrin felt, with absolute certainty, that this place was harder to enter than any fortress. The sewing woman touched his arm. Speak carefully here, because words cost something, because they remember. Aldrin stared at the waiting village. Somewhere within IT, a dog barked once, then stopped abruptly, as though even the dog had reconsidered. He took a breath and stepped forward with the others, leaving behind the vanished crossing and the ferryman, who had taken his beginning across water that had never been on any map. The village waited. Below the rise, with every blue lantern burning steady, and Aldrin felt the quiet weight of it before he reached the first cottage. Some places feel lived in, some feel abandoned. This village felt remembered. That was the only word his tired mind could find. Remembered by whom he did not know, and honestly, he was not eager to meet the sort of person capable of remembering an entire village into existence. That sounded like someone with far too much patience and probably very intense eyebrows. The pale road ran straight into the square. No gate marked the entrance. Nitrogen monoxide sign announced the village name. Yet every traveler lowered their head slightly as they passed the first lantern, as though crossing into a chapel or a house where someone had recently cried. Aldrin copied them. When in doubt, imitate the people who understand the curse. The cottages were small and neat, built from gray stone and dark timber. Their roofs sagged in places, but not from neglect, more like old shoulders accustomed to carrying winter after winter. Smoke rose from several chimneys, though nitrogen monoxide firelight showed behind the shutters. In the square stood a well. Its bucket hung perfectly still. Around it, villagers gathered without speaking. Men in patched tunics, women with shawls drawn tight, children peering from behind. Spirits. All of them watched the travelers arrive. No one smiled. No one looked surprised. The sewing woman moved to join them. The hooded man vanished into the crowd. The cage bearer stood beneath an eave, holding his empty cage against his chest. Aldrin suddenly felt very visible. A merchant enjoyed being noticed at market, where attention might become profit. Being noticed by an entire silent village under enchanted moonlight was less promising. No one had ever purchased good wool while staring as though measuring a coffin. An elderly man stepped forward. He wore a chain of carved bone pieces around his neck, each one marked with tiny symbols. Not rich, not noble, but everyone gave him space. So Aldrin decided he was either the village headman or the local person most likely to answer questions with riddles. Possibly both. Medieval administration was flexible that way. "You are new," the old man said, painfully so. A few children blinked at him. No one laughed. Tough crowd. The old man's eyes moved over Aldrin's face. "You crossed without guide. I followed others. That is not the same. So I am learning." The headman nodded once. "What did you give?" Aldrin hesitated. "A piece of cloth." "What color?" "Blue." The villagers murmured softly, not loudly enough to form words. The headman's expression changed, but only slightly. "Blue is for beginnings, so I was told." "And do you still wish to continue?" Aldrin glanced back. The road behind them shimmered faintly. Beyond the village, mist had swallowed the rise and everything before it. He thought of his mule waiting in some ordinary field, probably feeling smug and morally superior. "I seem to be somewhat committed." Commitment is a poor substitute for wisdom, yet very common. This time, one child gave the smallest possible snort. Aldrin considered that a victory. Headman turned and gestured toward the well. "Then hear what must be heard." The villagers parted. Aldrin approached carefully. The well stones were worn smooth by countless hands. Ribbons had been tied around the wooden beam above it, white, gray, brown, pale grain, and many shades faded beyond naming. The bucket rope disappeared into darkness. Nitrogen monoxide water gleamed below. "Look," said the headman. Aldrin did not want to. Naturally, he looked. At first, he saw only blackness, then a road, not the pale road beneath his feet, another road, a muddy lane under daylight. filled with villagers driving carts, children chasing geese, and women carrying baskets of apples. The image shifted. Night fell. A storm raged. People gathered in the square, frightened and shouting silently beneath flashing light. Then came a stranger, a tall woman in a traveling cloak. She carried nitrogen monoxide lantern. Her hair streamed silver in the rain. The villagers knelt before her. Aldrin gripped the stones. "What is this?" "Our bargain," said the headman. The image deepened. He saw crops drowned by flood, sheep lying still in fields, children fevered beneath blankets. Then the silver-haired woman raised one hand toward the road beyond the village. Moonlight poured over the mud, turning it pale as bone. The storm ceased. The sick rose, the fields greened, and the road remained. Only at night, Aldrin pulled back slowly. What did she ask in return? Passage. For herself? For all who could not pass on their own. The headman's voice remained calm, but the villagers lowered their eyes. At first, we thought it mercy. The lost came. The dead came. Those burdened by grief came. The road carried them east beyond the bell. And later? Later, roads grow hungry when walked too often. That sounded like something a road should have mentioned in advance. Aldrin rubbed his hands together. So the village is trapped, bound. That is usually the word people choose when they want trapped to sound dignified. The headman almost smiled. Almost. An eccentric custom revealed itself then. Near the well, a young woman approached carrying a bowl of salt and dried peas. She scattered 3 peas at each traveler's feet, then pinched salt over her left shoulder. Aldrin had heard of tossing salt against ill luck, but peas were new. He whispered to the nearest child, "WHY peas?" The child whispered back, "Because ghosts can't count them properly." Aldrin nodded solemnly. "Understandable. I've known living tax collectors with the same weakness." The child smiled, before remembering the mood and hiding behind a shawl. The headman continued, "Nitrogen monoxide name from this village appears on maps. WHY not? Because maps are promises made by daylight. We belong to night." Aldrin looked around. People lived here, cooked here, mended sleeves, raised children, buried loved ones, perhaps, though he saw nitrogen monoxide churchyard. Can nitrogen monoxide one leave? Some leave before their 13th year. Some marry into daylight villages and forget our name. Some return in dreams. After the bell claims you, leaving becomes difficult. The sewing woman stood among the villagers now, her empty hands folded. Aldrin suddenly understood. "You are from here." She nodded. "I left once, and returned. The road found me." That sentence made the lantern seem colder. From a lane beyond the square came music. Not cheerful music, a single pipe playing, a tune with too many pauses. The villagers turned toward IT. Children were ushered indoors. Doors closed softly. Blue lanterns were lowered until their light barely touched the stones. The headman placed one hand on Aldrin's shoulder. "You must not answer any voice that calls from behind. You while the pipe plays." Aldrin went very still. "Any voice? Especially one you love." The pipe continued, thin, sweet, terribly lonely. Aldrin thought of his father. Not often. Not willingly. The man had been dead 12 years and had left behind debts, a cracked measuring rod, and exactly 2 compliments, both delivered to other people. The music drifted closer. Then, From behind Aldrin, a familiar voice sighed softly. "Son." His mouth went dry. The villagers watched him without moving. The road leaned through the far lane, waiting beyond the houses. Aldrin fixed his eyes on the well stones. Every part of him wanted to turn. Every sensible part knew he must not. And above the quiet rooftops, the moon brightened, as though leaning in to see whether a man who had lost his beginning at the crossing would now lose his name in a village that daylight had forgotten. Aldrin did not turn. This achievement felt less heroic than stories made such moments sound. In songs, a brave man resists temptation with a lifted chin and noble silence. In real life, Aldrin stood gripping the well-stone so hard his knuckles ached, while every thought in his head shouted several unhelpful things at once. The voice came again. "Son." Softer this time, almost tired. That was cruel. His father had sounded tired near the end, when the debts had grown larger than pride, and every supper had become quieter than the last. Aldrin fixed his stare on a crack in the stone well. The crack looked like a crooked little river. Excellent. A river was something to think about. Not the voice, not the impossible. Hope that perhaps, on this road, even unfinished conversations might be found walking after dark. The pipe music drifted through the village square, thin as thread, sweet as stolen honey. The headman whispered, "Count your breath." Aldrin breathed in, out, in, out. Behind him, his father's voice said, "I kept your first coin." That nearly broke him. His first coin had vanished years ago. He had believed IT stolen. He had told himself IT didn't matter, though of course IT had mattered enormously, because people are ridiculous creatures and will survive famine with dignity, but become wounded over one missing coin. The voice sighed. "You were so proud." Aldrin closed his eyes. The headman said, sharper now, "Do not answer." The villagers stood motionless. Even the children hidden behind shutters made nitrogen monoxide sound. The pipe music circled the square like a moth around a candle. Then the voice changed. Not suddenly. That would have been easier. IT shifted gently, like milk souring overnight. "Turn around, boy." There it was, the old command. Not affection, not regret, authority. Aldrin felt something inside him cool. His fingers loosened from the well. "No," he whispered. The pipe stopped. Every blue lantern flared. The air behind him stirred with a sound like someone stepping backward through dry leaves. Then silence returned. The headman exhaled. "You did well." Aldrin opened his eyes. "I feel as though I did poorly in a very specific direction." "You remained yourself. That is apparently the standard now." "Here, IT is a high one." The villagers began moving again. Doors opened. Children peered out. Someone relit a lantern that had gone dim. The sewing woman approached Aldrin and placed something in his palm. A pea. Just one. "For counting," she sighed. "I thought ghosts couldn't count them." "Neither can grief sometimes." He looked at the tiny dry pea and decided with the solemnity of a king receiving a sacred relic to put it safely in his pocket. The headman gestured for him to follow. "The bell will sound before midnight." I thought IT had already sounded. That was the road calling. Naturally, a different bell. The same bell. Different meaning. Aldrin pinched the bridge of his nose. I miss when bells simply meant something was on fire, or someone had married badly. The headman laid him down a narrow lane between cottages. Above them, blue lanterns hung from iron hooks shaped like crescent moons. Before midnight, the old man said, the bell weighs all who walk the road. That sounds unpleasant. It is exact. Even worse. They reached a small chapel at the village edge. Its roof had partially collapsed, yet the bell tower remained whole. No cross stood atop it. Instead, iron ring hung there, black against the moon. Inside, the floor was covered with tiles painted in faded patterns. Roads, stars, hands, closed doors, open eyes. Aldrin noticed one tile showing a rooster wearing a tiny crown. He stared. The headman followed his gaze. Old village joke. I don't understand it. Nitrogen monoxide 1 does anymore. That made it better. An eccentric curiosity preserved in broken chapel tiles. ONCE. The village had crowned a rooster every spring because people believed its first crow argued the sun into rising. The bird was apparently given grain, ribbons, and more political legitimacy than several dukes Aldrin had met. At the center of the chapel stood a rope descending from the bell tower. It did not sway. The bell has 3 calls, the headman said. First, it gathers. Second, it chooses. Third, it closes. And which comes before midnight? The second, Aldrin looked at the rope, chooses what? Who may continue, and those not chosen. They remain until another night finds them. He thought of the silent travelers, the wrong shadows, the names in stone. How long can someone remain? The headman's expression became distant, long enough to forget they were waiting. Outside, the road glowed brighter. The moon had shifted westward. Midnight approached. Aldrin's tiredness settled over him in layers, not ordinary fatigue, something deeper, as though each hour of the road had been carefully removing pieces of him and asking whether he truly needed them. He missed his mule. He missed boring roads. He missed innkeepers who overcharged honestly. The villagers gathered outside the chapel. The travelers stood among them. The cage-bearer held his empty cage open. The old woodcarver cupped one last ashbird in both hands. The sewing woman watched the bell tower with calm dread. Then the rope moved. Nitrogen monoxide hand touched it. It pulled downward once. The bell rang. The sound passed through Aldrin's chest before reaching his ears. Every person in the lane cast a shadow at once, even those who had not cast shadows before. Some shadows lay straight, some stretched, some stretched, some stretched, some stretched. I sent you on, straight. Some stretched, some stretched, some stretched, some stretched. Such, far behind their owners, reaching toward the road like dark roots. Aldrin looked down. His own shadow stood beside him, not beneath him, beside him. It faced the chapel door. He swallowed. That seems wrong. The headman spoke softly. Ask it nothing. The bell rang a second time. Aldrin's shadow lifted one hand. He did not. Across the lane, the hooded man's shadow broke away and walked toward the pale road. The man followed it, weeping silently. The cage-bearer's shadow folded itself into the empty cage. He closed the door gently and smiled for the first time. The sewing woman's shadow remained at her feet, but the missing needle appeared within it, black and thin. She looked relieved and heartbroken at once. The bell rang a third time. Aldrin's shadow turned toward him. IT had nitrogen monoxide face. Of course IT had nitrogen monoxide face. That would have been too generous, yet somehow he knew what IT wanted. The blue cloth, his beginning, gone, given away. So the shadow reached instead toward his pocket, toward the P. Aldrin closed, his hand around IT. Nitrogen monoxide, he whispered. The shadow paused. From the tower, the bell rope trembled. The headman sighed, "It may choose your burden." Aldrin kept holding the P. "Then it may choose something else." The shadow leaned closer. Cold spread through him. He thought of his father's voice, of not turning, of the first coin, of the road that had appeared only when ordinary paths became impossible. Slowly, Aldrin opened his other hand. Empty. "I have nitrogen monoxide payment," he sighed, "but I have a question." The headman stiffened. The bell rope stopped trembling. The shadow tilted. IT's head. Aldrin's voice steadied. "If this road chooses, who continues? Who chose the road?" For the first time, the village itself seemed to listen. The lanterns dimmed. The chapel tiles glimmered faintly. Far away, beyond the houses, the pale road answered with a soft sound like stones remembering rain. The bell did not ring again. Instead, every shadow returned to its owner. Aldrin's slid beneath his boots, where it belonged, which was frankly the only sensible place for a shadow. The headman stared at him. No outsider has asked that before. Outsiders are often busy surviving. "Will you seek the answer?" Aldrin looked toward the road. Beyond the village, IT curved into ash trees and silver mist. Somewhere ahead waited the reason for the bargain, the curse and the ancient price hidden beneath all these careful rules. He closed his fingers around the P. "Apparently," he sighed, "I am continuing." The village did not cheer when Aldrin chose to continue. That would have been nice. A little applause. Perhaps one brave child shouting encouragement. Maybe someone pressing warm bread into his hands and saying, "For the road, good sir," and also because bread improves nearly every disaster. Instead, the villagers simply stepped aside. This, Aldrin had noticed, was how people behaved around choices they secretly believed were terrible but technically honorable. The headman walked with him to the far edge of the village, where the pale road curved between two rows of ash trees. The white ribbons tied to their branches fluttered, without wind. Beyond them, the moonlit path narrowed, becoming less like a road built by human hands, and more like a line drawn through the world by someone uncertain whether worlds were meant to stay separate. The sewing woman stood nearby. Her missing needle nitrogen monoxide longer existed, yet her hand still moved now and then pinching invisible thread. "Will you come?" Aldrin asked her. She shook her head. "My choosing ended here. Is that good? Ask me after dawn." "Helpful as ever." She smiled faintly. "Try not to give the road your name." "I was trying not to give it anything." "Then you will be disappointed." The headman gave Aldrin a small horn lantern, filled not with flame, but with a pale blue glow that trembled like captured moonlight. "IT will show what wishes to be found, and what wishes to find me. Nitrogen monoxide lantern helps with that." Naturally, Aldrin accepted IT. A road that appeared only at night, a village missing from maps, a bell that argued with shadows, and now a lantern with selective interests. Truly, this journey had the organization of a drunken goose. He stepped past the last cottage. The village sounds faded behind him. Nitrogen monoxide doors closing. Nitrogen monoxide voices. Nitrogen monoxide footsteps following. Only the soft hush of his own boots and the faint clink of the lantern handle. The road entered a wood. Ash trees grew close on either side, their pale trunks gleaming like bones washed clean by rain. Their leaves whispered overhead, though. The air remained still. After some time, Aldrin noticed tracks. Not cart tracks, footprints, many of them. Some human, some animal, some shaped almost like bare feet, but too long and too narrow. They crossed the road from both sides, then vanished before reaching the opposite verge. He lifted the lantern. The blue light brightened. Ahead, beside a fallen tree, sat an old man wearing a hunter's cloak patched with so many different fabrics it looked as though several defeated coats had formed an alliance. A bow rested across his knees. A quiver leaned against a log. His beard was white, his eyes were sharp, and his boots were wrapped in strips of red wool. He looked up. "You're late." Aldrin stopped. "I've been told I'm early." By innkeepers, villagers, or dead folk? All three, possibly. Then they were being polite. The old hunter gestured to the fallen tree. "Sit. The road ahead dislikes people who rush." Aldrin glanced around. "And you are?" "Someone who once rushed." That answer fit the evening perfectly. Aldrin sat at the far end of the log. The hunter removed a small bundle from his pouch and unfolded it. Inside were roasted chestnuts. He offered one. Aldrin hesitated. "Is there a rule about accepting chestnuts?" "Yes, eat them before they get cold." At last, a rule he understood. He took one. It tasted smoky and sweet. The hunter watched the road. "They still keeping the blue lanterns in the village?" "Yes." "Good. Yellow ones attracted moths the size of pigeons." Aldrin slowly turned his head. "Pigeons, large pigeons." That was the part I understood least. The hunter cracked another chestnut with his thumb. "Name's Harrow. I hunted these woods when the king's grandfather was still learning which end of a horse complained." "You are from the village?" "Near enough." "And you know this road?" "I know what it lets me know." That is becoming a very popular kind of answer. Harrow chuckled. The sound was dry and gentle. "You're looking for who chose the road." Aldrin tightened his grip on the lantern. "How did you know?" "The ash trees told me." "They speak?" "No, but they gossip through leaves. Different thing." Aldrin accepted this with the calm resignation of a man whose standards for reality had suffered serious damage. Harrow pointed toward the tracks ahead. "Before you ask the road, anything, you must know what is hunted along it. Wolves? Worse? Bandits? Worse? Taxmen?" Harrow paused. "Different kind of worse." That seemed fair. The old hunter leaned back and began his tale. Long before Aldrin had been born, before the village lost its place on maps, these woods were ordinary enough. Hunters came for deer. Children gathered mushrooms. Lovers carved initials into trees, because apparently young hearts could not feel affection without vandalizing bark. Then the night road appeared. At first, animals noticed it before people did. Hounds refused to cross certain clearings after sunset. Horses sweated through their blankets. Owls gathered along branches, all facing east. Harrow had been young then, and exactly foolish enough to investigate. "How foolish?" Aldrin asked. "Young man with new boots foolish." "Ah, severe. Harrow nodded gravely. One winter night he followed silver hoofprints through the ash wood. They belonged to no deer he knew, too narrow, too deep. Each print held moonlight. He tracked them for hours, though the woods folded strangely around him. A stream appeared 3 times. A hill stood where nitrogen monoxide hill belonged. His own campfire smoke drifted past him from ahead, which was irritating because he had not lit IT yet. At last he reached a clearing where 7 white hearts stood in a circle. Not deer, not spirits, something between. Their antlers carried little bells tied with black thread. None of the bells rang. In the center of the circle lay a broken stone marker carved with an old woman's name. The lady beneath the ash trees, Harrow sighed. Aldrin leaned closer. The silver-haired woman from the bargain? The same, or what was left of her story? Harrow had watched the hearts lower their heads toward the stone. Then, one by one, they stepped onto the moonlit road and vanished. He should have gone home. Naturally, he followed. Of course you did, Aldrin said. New boots. Powerful curse. Harrow's mouth twitched. The road lead him not east, but backward through memories of the village. He saw fields before the flood. He saw children not yet born. He saw graves not yet dug. And at the edge of everything, he saw the lady standing beneath ash trees, speaking with someone hidden in shadow. Not a demon, not a saint, not a king. A road keeper. The first keeper. The one who offered passage where nitrogen monoxide passage should be. What did the lady want? Aldrin asked. To save her people. And the keeper to be remembered. The lantern flame trembled. Harrow looked at IT. That's the trouble with old powers. They ask for worship. Fear, blood, gold. But the worst ones ask simply not to be forgotten. People are very bad at that kind of payment. We misplace names faster than socks in a laundry yard. Aldrin frowned. What happened to the hunter in your story? Lost 3 fingers. Harrow lifted his left hand. All 5 fingers remained. Aldrin stared. Harrow grinned. Not those. 3 fingers of time. I dislike that sentence. You should. The old man explained that when he returned to the village, 3 years had passed. His mother had buried an empty cloak. His friends had married, aged, quarreled, and borrowed his traps without permission. Worst of all, he returned knowing the road could be followed to its source, only by someone who had given up a beginning, resisted a beloved voice, and asked who chose the path. Aldrin sat very still. That seemed specific. Roads love specific. W8 telling me? Because tonight the bell did not close. Far behind them, faint as memory, a bell tone stirred in the air. Harrow rose and shouldered his bow. The lady waits ahead beneath ash trees older than the village. She may answer. She may lie. She may invite you to dance, which I advise refusing unless you enjoy waking up with moss in your pockets and a decade missing. Aldrin stood. Are you coming? Harrow shook his head. I guide to the edge. W.A. not farther? The old hunter looked down at the red wool wrapped around his boots. Old custom. Red thread. Keeps the road from mistaking your feet for its own. Works poorly, but confidence is half of superstition. He pointed ahead. There, beyond the trees, the road split around a dark grove where ash branches bent inward. Like listening heads, the lantern in Aldrin's hand flared brighter. Harrow's voice soft. Walk straight until the flowers stop watching. Then speak only when spoken to, And if she asks what you seek, do not say freedom, W-H-Y, because freedom is what traps ask you to name before they close. Aldrin swallowed, thanked the hunter, and continued alone toward the grove, where the moonlight turned silver white, and every ash tree seemed to be holding its breath. Aldrin walked until the hunter's patched cloak vanished behind the ash trunks, and the forest closed softly around him, not loudly. That would have been easier. Nitrogen monoxide snapping branches. Nitrogen monoxide sudden owl cries. Nitrogen monoxide dramatic thunder rolling across the heavens like a badly paid drummer. Just a quiet narrowing of the world, branch by branch, until the pale road beneath his boots seemed the only honest thing remaining, which was unfortunate, because he nitrogen monoxide longer trusted the road either. The blue lantern swung from his hand. Its light brightened whenever he faced forward and dimmed whenever he glanced back. Subtle, bossy, exactly the sort of lantern that would have opinions about soup. The ash trees leaned close. Their bark bore old carvings, initials, circles, birds, eyes, and once, unmistakably, a very rude drawing of a goat. Aldrin paused before IT, despite himself. Good to know fear never entirely defeats immaturity. The goat offered nitrogen monoxide comment. He continued. The road narrowed. On either side, the soil darkened, and from it rose the same lantern lily he had seen before. Their white, bell-shaped blossoms turned toward him, watching, every single one. I was warned about attentive flowers, he murmured. The blossoms trembled, perhaps from wind, probably not. He kept his eyes on the ground. That was when he noticed the footprints. They ran beside the road, just beyond the stone edge, small at first, bare feet. A child's, perhaps, then longer, then booted, then clawed, then backwards. Aldrin stopped. The lantern light spilled over the tracks, and suddenly each print filled with a faint image. In one, he saw a woman dropping a basket of apples. In another, a young man kneeling beside a broken wheel. In another, a child laughing, as though chased by someone kind. Then came prints shaped like hooves, but each held a tiny reflection of the moon. Harrow's white hearts. Aldrin followed them with his eyes. The tracks crossed the road ahead and disappeared into bracken. He remembered the hunter's warning. Walk straight until the flowers stop watching. The flowers were very much still watching. So naturally, curiosity began tugging at him like a bored child. He had always suffered from this weakness. Show him a locked chest, and he would wonder what lay inside. Show him a forbidden lane, and he would consider the weather suitable for exploring. Show him a sign reading, "Do not touch," and his fingers would suddenly become philosophers seeking truth through direct experience. He stayed on the road, barely. A soft voice called from the bracken. Merchant. He froze, not behind him, to his left. The flowers turned toward the voice. Merchant, your mule waits here. That was low, cruel even. He liked that mule, mostly. Nice try, Aldrin sighed. A pause. Then the voice changed. Your packs are torn. Your cloth is ruined. Now that hurt differently. He imagined rain soaking fine wool, mud staining linen, months of profit dissolving into tragedy. Still, he kept walking. Joke's on you, he whispered. My finances were already fragile. The bracken rustled. Something moved beside him, matching his pace. He did not look. The road stones grew colder underfoot. His breath appeared in front of him, though the night had not been cold before. Another footprint glimmered at the edge of the lantern light. This one was fresh, his own boot mark, but he had not stepped. There, Aldrin's stomach tightened. Ahead, more prints appeared. His prints, leaving the road, entering the trees. The blue lantern flared. It showed a trail he had not taken, a future path, perhaps. A tempting one. The road's opinion, which he had not requested. He crouched without touching the ground. Within the nearest false footprint, he saw himself pushing through branches, hurrying toward the sound of his mule's bray. Then hands emerging from the bark, then ribbons wrapping his wrists, then stillness. He stood quickly. "Thank you, lantern." Horrifying but useful. The lantern dimmed modestly, as if praised. In several hill villages, travelers once carried stale crusts in their pockets at night, not to eat, but to throw behind them when followed by hungry spirits. The belief was that spirits were obligated to count crumbs before continuing pursuit. Aldrin had always thought this unfair to both ghosts and bread, now lacking crusts. He wondered whether the single pea in his pocket might do the work of an entire loaf. He did not test. The unseen thing beside the road grew impatient. Branches scraped. A low breath moved through the lily. Then the flowers stopped watching him. All at once, every blossom bowed away, facing deeper into the grove. Aldrin halted. The hunter had sighed to walk straight until the flowers stopped watching. He had reached that place. The road ahead widened into a clearing. At its center stood a circle of ancient ash trees, larger than the others, their roots twisting over the stones as though trying to hold the road down. White ribbons hung from every branch, thousands of them, some fresh, some rotted, some nitrogen monoxide wider than thread, some broad enough to have been torn from funeral cloth or wedding sleeves. They moved slowly, though nitrogen monoxide wind touched them. Beneath the trees, the footprints converged, human, animal, impossible, all leading inward, none leading out. Aldrin lifted the lantern. Its blue light revealed something written in the dust between the roots. Names, so many names, not carved, not inked, pressed into the earth by footsteps, each step a name, each name half faded. He found himself searching, despite knowing he shouldn't. Aldrin. There. Not complete. Only the first letters. A-L. He backed away. Recognition is a hook. The sewing woman's warning returned sharp and clear. He turned his face from the names. A laugh sounded among the trees. Soft. Female. Not mocking. Almost delighted. You read carefully for a man who cannot keep from asking questions. Aldrin kept still. That depends on whether the questions are trying to eat me. Most things here are hungry, I had noticed. The ribbons parted. A figure stepped from beneath the ash trees. At first he thought she was young, then old, then neither. Her hair fell, silver white to her waist, though her face was smooth as moonlit water. Her cloak seemed woven from mist, ash leaves, and the last pale hour before dawn. The lady. She stood barefoot on the cold stones. Nitrogen monoxide shadow followed her. Nitrogen monoxide breath misted before her lips. Yet she looked more alive than anyone Aldrin had seen all night. Merchant Aldrin. She sighed. His name struck the air like a plucked string. He flinched. She smiled. Only the part you brought openly. Do not worry. That's not the soothing statement you think IT is. Her smile deepened. Harrow found you. He did. Still wrapping his boots in red wool? Yes, he was always dramatic. From you, that seemed significant. The lady laughed again, and the ash ribbons lifted around her like pale birds startled into flight. She walked along the circle's edge. Aldrin remained outside IT. That seemed wise. You followed footprints, she sighed. I followed the road. Roads are only footprints that learned ambition. I miss simple dirt. No, you don't. He wanted to argue, but she looked at him with such calm certainty that the words faded. Maybe he didn't. Maybe ordinary roads had never been enough, which was why curiosity kept dragging him into trouble, wearing the expression of destiny. The lady extended one hand toward the circle. Come closer. Nitrogen monoxide. A pause. The ribbon stilled. Then she smiled. Good. Aldrin blinked. Was that a test? Everything is. Exhausting. Yes. She turned toward the oldest ash tree, whose trunk was hollow at the center. Inside the hollow, something glimmered faintly. Not gold. Not jewels. A milestone fragment. The broken stone Harrow had described. The road began here, she sighed. Not with magic, as your storytellers will claim. Magic is merely the name people give to bargains when they arrive late and miss the negotiation. And you negotiated? I pleaded. The grove quieted. Even the lily beyond the clearing seemed to listen. My village was dying, she sighed. Flood, fever, hunger. The old paths had washed away. Nitrogen monoxide priest came. Nitrogen monoxide lord sent rain. Nitrogen monoxide physician crossed the marsh. We were a name already fading. So you made the road. I asked for passage. From whom? Her gaze shifted to the hollow tree. From what waits where roads end? The lantern in Aldrin's hand guttered blue. For a moment, every footprint in the clearing darkened. The lady's voice softened. IT answered. IT saved you, us. And in return, we promised to remember the way. Aldrin looked at the ribbons, the names, the watching flowers. But memory became payment. Memory always becomes payment. He thought of the milestone, of travelers giving keys, needles, carved birds, beginnings. What happens if nitrogen monoxide one remembers? The lady looked suddenly tired. Then the road remembers itself, and roads are poor masters. A sound rose from beyond the grove. Footsteps. Many footsteps. The impossible tracks around the clearing began filling with moonlight. The lady stepped nearer, stopping just before the circle's edge. Before dawn, the road will ask you for the name of its first keeper. Find that name, and the bargain may break. And if I fail, then your footprints will remain here, walking beside men who should never have followed curious stones. Aldrin swallowed. Where do I find the name? The lady lifted her hand and pointed beyond the ash circle, where the pale road split into 3 directions. Each path gleamed under the moon. Each bore fresh footprints. His own, all 3. Follow the prints. That do not flatter you, she sighed. Could you be less cryptic? I could, but then you might survive carelessly. The ribbon stirred, the footsteps grew louder. Aldrin backed toward the crossroads, lantern held high, while the lady beneath the ash trees watched him with sorrowful patience. And there, waiting in the dust of 3 impossible paths, he saw 3 versions of his own journey. One brave, one easy, and one terribly honest. Aldrin stood at the place where the road divided into 3 moonlit paths, and for once all 3 choices looked equally unreasonable. The left path was broad and bright. Its stones shone clean as polished bone, and every footprint upon it appeared confident. Aldrin saw himself striding there with shoulders squared, lantern high, cloak moving heroically behind him despite the complete absence of wind. Very impressive, very suspicious. The middle path was softer. Moss grew between the stones. The air carried the smell of warm bread, dry wool, and stable straw. Somewhere along it, a mule gave a familiar grumbling bray, the sound of an animal who had opinions and intended to file them formally. The right path was narrow, crooked, half sunk in mud. Its footprints staggered, paused, doubled back, then continued. They looked tired, frightened, honest in the deeply annoying way honest things often are. Follow the prints that do not flatter you, the lady had sighed. Aldrin sighed. Naturally, he stepped onto the right path. Immediately, the other 2 roads dimmed. The heroic version of himself vanished first, which felt rude but fair. The comfortable path lingered longer, offering one last smell of hay and safe ordinary darkness. Then it too disappeared. The narrow path carried him away from the ash grove, though the lady's presence remained behind him like moonlight on his shoulders. The trees here grew farther apart. Their roots crossed the road in thick black ropes. Several times Aldrin nearly tripped, which somewhat damaged the dignity of his quest. It is difficult to feel chosen by fate while hopping on one foot and muttering at roots. His lantern revealed more prints in the mud. Not only his now, a woman's bare feet. The lady's. They appeared beside his own, leading forward. Soon the air changed. The forest thinned, and he found himself walking not through trees, but through memory. A field opened around him. Daylight flickered above it, weak and storm-colored, though the moon still hung overhead. Villagers moved like pale reflections through rain. They carried bundles, children, tools, sacks of grain gone black with rot. At the field's edge stood the lady, younger now, her silver hair braided, her cloak soaked through. She held a child in her arms. The child did not move. Aldrin stopped, breathing for a moment. The vision passed. Before becoming too sharp, rain became moonlight again. The narrow road continued. So that was before, he murmured. The lantern flickered once, as if answering. A few steps later, another vision rose, the lady kneeling in mud before a broken bridge. Behind her, villagers waited. Ahead, across floodwater, a ridge held dry land, smoke from distant settlements, perhaps help. But the bridge had collapsed, and the current tore at its stones. She pressed both hands into the mud and spoke words Aldrin could not hear. The water stilled, not naturally, not safely. It stilled like an animal pretending sleep. From the far bank came a figure wrapped in a dark cloak, the road keeper. Aldrin tried to see its face. The lantern dimmed, the memory blurred. Of course, he muttered, wouldn't want the answer to be visible. That might spoil the tradition of everyone being difficult. The figure extended one hand. The lady took it. Moonlight spread from their joined fingers, pouring over the ruined bridge, over the mud, over the drowned lane. The first stones of the night road appeared. The villagers crossed. Some carried the sick. Some wept. Some kissed the stones. Aldrin watched. as hope entered them like warmth after winter. Then the vision changed. Years passed in breaths. The village prospered. Fields grew. Children returned to laughter. Travelers came by night, guided by bells, lanterns, and ribbons. The lady aged, though slowly. Each time the road opened, she tied one white ribbon to an ash branch and whispered a name. At first, the names were remembered with love, then with duty, then with fear. Then, after many seasons, villagers tied ribbons without knowing whose names they carried. Memory became habit. Habit became payment. Payment became hunger. The vision faded. Aldrin walked on in silence. He understood now why the lady's sorrow felt older than guilt. She had not wished to trap anyone. She had asked for rescue and discovered too late that even mercy can grow teeth when bound to a bargain. The path dipped. Ahead stood a single ash tree, smaller than the others, bent by age. Beneath it rested a stone bench. The lady sat there, not memory, now herself. She looked at Aldrin as he approached. You chose the unkind path. It seemed the least likely to compliment me, a reliable method. He sat at the far end of the bench. The bark above them was covered in tiny holes. In each hole rested a rolled scrap of cloth. What are those? Unsent farewells. That is cheerful. They are better kept here than carried forever. An eccentric old custom, she explained, had once belonged to the village. Anyone who could not speak goodbye aloud would tuck a written farewell into an ash tree before sunrise. Woodpeckers were believed to deliver the words to the dead by tapping them into the next world. Aldrin imagined a very tired bird managing generations of emotional correspondence and decided nature deserved more respect. The lady folded her hands. You saw enough. I saw why you chose the road. No, you saw why one thought I chose it. Aldrin looked at her. She continued softly. The first keeper did not force me. That is what makes the bargain difficult to hate. It offered exactly what I begged for. And its name? Names are not given by those who regret using them. Can you not say it? I can. Nitrogen monoxide longer hold it. The road took that first. Aldrin studied her face. Then why help me? Because you asked who chose the road. For many years people asked how to escape, how to pay, how to endure. Those questions fed the path. Yours wounded it. That sounds useful. It also woke it. Less useful. Behind them, far away, the bell gave a low, unfinished murmur. The lady stood. At the crossroads ahead, old promises meet. There you will find a shrine beneath 3 stones. One promise belongs to me, one to the keeper, one to the village. And the name? Hidden where promises disagree. That is almost an answer. It is more than I should give. The road trembled beneath Aldrin's boots. Mud rippled like water. From the darkness behind them came the sound of many steps, slow and synchronized. The lady turned toward it. The road knows you are looking. Aldrin rose quickly. Will it stop me? No. It will persuade you. With threats? With kindness first. Terrifying. She smiled sadly. Yes. The narrow path brightened ahead, leading toward 3 standing stones on a low hill. Around them, shadows moved like patient witnesses. Aldrin tightened his grip on the blue lantern and started walking. Behind him, the lady whispered, When you find my promise, do not pity me. Pity may become another chain. He did not turn back. He had learned that lesson well enough. So he followed the crooked prints through the thinning wood, carrying one dry pea, one borrowed lantern, and the uncomfortable knowledge that the road had not begun as evil at all. It had begun as an answer to prayer, and that somehow made it far more dangerous. The hill with the 3 standing stones rose from the mist like the back of some enormous sleeping beast. Aldrin climbed carefully. The path twisted beneath his boots, pretending to be solid while clearly considering other options. Around him, the trees thinned until only grass, stone, and moonlight remained. At the hilltop, the 3 stones leaned inward. Each was taller than a man. Each bore carvings worn by age: a hand, a road, and an eye. Between them stood a little shrine nitrogen monoxide, larger than a bread oven, built from flat rocks stacked, without mortar. Inside rested 3 objects: a white ribbon, a rusted ring, a clay cup cracked down one side. Aldrin lifted the lantern. The blue flame burned low. "So," he whispered, "promises disagree here." The moment he spoke, the air changed. The first stone, marked with the hand, warmed under moonlight. The white ribbon stirred inside the shrine. A voice filled the hill. The lady's voice, younger and desperate. "Let my people pass, and I will remember the way." The ribbon tightened into a knot. The second stone, marked with the road, darkened. The rusted ring rolled once. Though nitrogen monoxide hand touched IT, another voice answered, neither male nor female, deep as wheels over frozen ground. "Remember me, and I will open where nitrogen monoxide road remains." The ring stopped. The third stone, marked with the eye, glimmered faintly. The cracked cup trembled. Many voices spoke together. "We drink from mercy, and we bind our children to gratitude." Aldrin winced. Oh, that was a mistake. The hill went still. Then the grass around the stones filled with shadows, villagers, travelers, hunters, children, all made of moonlight and memory. None approached. They only watched. Aldrin examined the shrine again. 3 promises. The lady promised memory. The keeper promised passage. The village promised gratitude. But none held a name. He crouched, peering beneath the stones. There were scratch marks in the dirt, not letters, lines, a crossroads symbol, 4 directions, yet the road had only 3. Where is the 4th path? He murmured. The rusted ring snapped upright. Behind him, a new road appeared. IT ran downhill into darkness. Nitrogen monoxide moonlight touched eye. Nitrogen monoxide lily watched from its edges. IT looked plain, ordinary, almost safe, which, by now, was basically the road equivalent of wearing a false mustache. A warm smell drifted from it. Fresh hay, mule sweat, rain on canvas. Then came the soft clink of harness. Aldrin closed his eyes. Kindness first, he sighed. His mule brayed from the dark, not a trick of memory, not his father's voice. The mule sounded exactly as annoyed as ever. Aldrin turned. At the foot of the hill stood the animal, packs still tied, ears tilted with magnificent judgment. "Ah," Aldrin sighed softly. "There you are." The mule stamped. The 4th road waited between them. All he had to do was walk down, take the packs, leave. The village, the lady, the keeper, the names, none of it belonged to him. He was a cloth merchant, not a saint, not a knight, not even a particularly organized traveler. A voice beside him said, "You have done enough." The sewing woman stood near the shrine, or something wearing her face. Aldrin did not answer. Another figure appeared. Harrow, red wool around his boots, chestnuts in hand. No shame in leaving, he sighed. Then the innkeeper. Warm smile, kind eyes. Roads end when travelers choose rest. Aldrin looked from one to another. Very persuasive. The mule brayed again. The false Harrow cracked a chestnut. You owe these people nothing. That was true, terribly true, and truth Aldrin was learning could be bait when offered at the right angle. He reached into his pocket and touched the pea. Small, dry, absurd. The child, the child, the child had sighed ghosts, could not count them properly. Perhaps grief could not either. Perhaps temptation disliked being made ridiculous. Aldrin pulled out the pea and held it up. Before I decide, he sighed, which of you can count this? The three figures went silent. The mule vanished. The fourth road flickered. Aldrin smiled despite his fear. Thought S.O. The false faces stretched thin, then tore into mist. The hill returned, only the 3 stones remained. But now, where the fourth road had appeared, Aldrin saw markings carved into the ground. Letters, half buried. He scraped away dirt with his sleeve. The name began to show. Not in the common tongue. Older, he sounded it carefully. Ilawan? The standing stones shook. The bell rang far away. Once. Hard. The rusted ring split. Apart. The white ribbon loosened. The cracked cup filled with clear water. Though nitrogen monoxide rain fell, Aldrin stared. Ilawan. The name moved through the air like dawn testing a window. The shadows around the hill bowed their heads. Then the road itself groaned, not beneath him. Everywhere, a deep, wounded sound rolled through the night. From between the stones rose a figure made of dust, moonlight, and endless distance. The first keeper, Ilawan, its face was almost human, but unfinished, as though memory had rubbed away the details. You found what was not offered, IT sighed. Aldrin swallowed. IT was buried where promises disagreed. So IT was. Are you the road? I am what remained when the road forgot IT was a gift. That was not the answer he expected. Then again, he had stopped expecting useful things several miles ago. Ilawan looked toward the shrine. I asked to be remembered. You were. I was used. Aldrin sighed nothing. That too was true. The keeper had become bell, toll, crossing, hunger, fear. A name trapped inside rules until only the rules remained. The blue lantern flared once and went out. Moonlight alone filled the hill. Ilawan extended one pale hand. Speak my name at dawn, and the road will end. Good. And all who depend on IT will lose passage. Aldrin's relief faded. The keeper continued gently. The dead who wander, the grieving who seek farewell, the lost who cannot bear daylight, the village bound to gratitude. End the road, and mercy closes with the curse. Oh, of course, ancient oaths never broke cleanly. They shattered like cheap pottery at a feast, leaving everyone barefoot and pretending not to bleed. Aldrin looked at the ribbon, ring, and cup. What is the other choice? Ilawan's hollow face tilted. Remember rightly, meaning? Not toll, not bargain, not hunger. Name me freely, and carry the road as story rather than chain. That sounds less dramatic. IT is harder. Aldrin thought of tavern tailies, market gossip, village songs, old women arranging onions like royal advisors. Stories traveled farther than roads. They crossed borders, outlived kings, and required nitrogen monoxide ferrymen, though they did occasionally exaggerate the size of wolves. At last he nodded. "I will carry IT." Elowen lowered its hand, then walked to the last bell. The three objects in the shrine dissolved into pale dust. Below the hill, one road remained, leading onward beneath the fading moon. Aldrin stepped down from the standing stones, no longer followed by false comforts, but by the weight of an old name resting carefully in his mind. Aldrin descended from the hill with Elowen's name resting in his mind like a candle cupped against wind. He did not repeat IT aloud. Not yet. Names had proven entirely too active on this road, and he preferred not to wake anything extra. The night already had enough personality. Behind him, the three standing stones faded into mist. Ahead, the pale road continued between low banks of grass silvered with dew. The blue lantern in his hand had gone dark, but IT had not become useless. Its glass still held a faint inner sheen, as though remembering light the way an old hearth remembers fire. That seemed appropriate. Everything here remembered something, sometimes badly, sometimes hungrily, sometimes with the stubborn tenderness of a person keeping one dry pea safe in his pocket. The road soon reached a field of milestones. Not one, dozens, hundreds. They stood at ODD, angles on both sides of the path, leaning like tired listeners. Some were tall and narrow, others squat and moss-covered. A few had cracked open, revealing pale crystal inside instead of stone. Each milestone bore names. Aldrin kept his gaze low. Recognition is a hook. He had learned that properly now, the way people learn not to touch hot iron after touching IT exactly once. Among the stones sat a figure at a writing desk. The desk was absurdly neat. Ink bottle, quills, stacks of parchment, a little sand shaker for drying fresh ink. All of IT, arranged in the middle of a moonlit field, because apparently furniture had also begun traveling without explanation. The figure looked up. He was thin, ageless, and dressed in a robe the color of old paper. His hair was tied back with black thread. Around his neck hung a chain of tiny blank tablets. "Merchant Aldrin," he said. Aldrin stopped several paces away. "I am developing concerns about how freely my name circulates. Only fragments circulate. Whole names require care. And you are? The keeper of forgotten names." Aldrin stared at him. "That sounds like a position with terrible hours. Endless." "Ah, worse." The keeper gestured toward the chair opposite him. Aldrin remained standing. "Wise," said the keeper. "Chairs here are often agreements." Naturally. The keeper dipped his quill into ink. "You found the first keeper's name. I found a name. Do not play dull. It does not suit you. Many disagree." The keeper smiled faintly. "Humor is useful. IT keeps fear from sitting too close." That was possibly the most sensible thing anyone had sighed all night. The milestones around them rustled. Stones should not rustle. Yet the carved names shifted softly, as though turning in sleep. The keeper opened a large ledger. Its pages were filled with names, written in different hands, some elegant, some childish, some scratched so hard the parchment nearly tore. "What is this place?" Aldrin asked. "Where names rest when nitrogen monoxide mouth carries them. Rest, or wait. Those are different. Very." Aldrin looked at the field. "Are these all travelers?" Travelers, villagers, promises, roads, horses, bells, one exceptionally memorable goose. Aldrin blinked. Goose? It terrorized 3 parishes and delayed a bishop. Then the name was earned. The keeper nodded gravely. There was the eccentric curiosity of that place. Certain medieval villages once gave formal names to troublesome animals so legal blame could be assigned properly. A pig might be called before a magistrate. A goat might be cursed from a garden. And apparently one goose might achieve near political immortality through pure spite. The keeper turned a page. You carry a name that wishes to be remembered rightly. Ilawan. The field went still. Aldrin regretted speaking immediately, but the keeper only closed his eyes. Softly done. Was I not supposed to say IT? Names are not knives unless thrown. The line sank into Aldrin. He thought of his father's voice saying son like a chain. He thought of his own name half carved into the milestone. Why do names matter so much here? Because names are doors. That explains nothing, and yet sounds expensive. The keeper lifted one blank tablet from his chain. Call a thing by hunger long, ENOUGH. And IT may forget IT was once help. Call a person by failure, long ENOUGH. And they may forget every other room inside themselves. Call a road cursed long enough, IT becomes a curse. It remembers the shape expected of IT. Aldrin slowly sat on a nearby stone after checking IT was not obviously in agreement. The keeper's quill moved without touching parchment. Ilawan was not always keeper of a road. She was a maker of paths before paths were owned. In old days, people asked her blessing when crossing marsh, mountain, grief, childbirth, exile. She was worshipped, remembered. Difference? Worship looks upward. Memory sits beside. Aldrin considered that. IT was annoyingly beautiful. The keeper continued. When the lady begged passage, Ilawan answered according to her nature, but the village feared losing rescue. Fear made rules. Rules demanded tolls. Tolls required enforcement. Enforcement became the road you walk. So everyone is guilty. Everyone is involved. That sounds kinder. IT is more accurate. The ledger turned its own pages. Aldrin saw his name written near the bottom of a fresh sheet. Only Ald. Not complete. Beside it waited a blank space. What happens if that finishes? You become easier to keep. Let's avoid that. Then you must choose how your name travels onward. Aldrin frowned. I don't understand. No one does at first. The keeper slid a small parchment toward him. On it were 3 lines. Aldrin, son of nitrogen monoxide praise. Aldrin, merchant of lost roads. Aldrin, bearer of Ilawan's name. His throat tightened at the first. The second felt tempting in a dramatic, self-pitying way. The third frightened him. Must I choose one? You already have, many times. Names are shaped by repetition. Tonight merely lets you notice. Aldrin touched the parchment's edge. I don't want to be only one thing. Then do not sign a small name. The keeper handed him the quill. The ink at its tip shone like midnight. Aldrin hesitated. He thought of cloth measured carefully across market tables, of roads walked late, of the mule refusing moonlit stones, of the old woman with onions warning him, of the inn without a name, of the ferryman taking his beginning, of the child giving him a pea, of Ilawan, remembered as hunger when she had first been help. Then he wrote, Aldrin, who kept walking and remembered mercy. The ink dried instantly. The milestones sighed. Some names upon them brightened, others softened. The keeper read the line and nodded. A roomy name. It feels presumptuous. Most true names do, until lived in. He tore the page from the ledger and folded IT into a small square. Carry this until the last bell. Do not open IT. Do not trade IT. Do not let any voice improve it. Improve IT? The road will offer better versions. Braver, sadder, more flattering. Refuse them. Aldrin tucked the folded parchment inside his tunic. The keeper stood. All around the field, the milestones began turning, one by one, toward the east. The night thins, he said. Soon comes the final bargain, with Elaun, with what the road became without her name. Aldrin looked down the pale path. Far away, darkness gathered across it like a gate. Any advice? The keeper considered. Do not mistake sacrifice for goodness. Some chains praise themselves as noble. That is deeply unsettling advice. Good. Remember IT. A bell sounded ahead, not behind. Ahead. Low, slow, patient. The last bell calling before dawn. Aldrin stepped away from the desk. When he looked back, the keeper had already returned to writing, though the chair across from him was gone. The field of names faded into mist. Only the road remained, leading toward the dark gate and the bargain waiting there. Aldrin walked on, carrying Eluan's name, his own newly written one, and the uneasy understanding that forgetting was not always emptiness. Sometimes forgetting was a prison with very polite walls. The dark gate ahead was not truly a gate. Aldrin decided that immediately. Gates had hinges, posts, latches occasionally, guards with suspicious noses and too much interest in other people's bags. This thing had none of that. It was only darkness standing across the road in a tall, narrow shape, as though night itself had folded its arms and refused passage. The bell sounded from beyond IT, slow, patient, not loud. Somehow worse. Aldrin approached until the pale stones ended beneath his boots. Behind him, the road stretched back through mist, carrying all the places he had passed. The inn, the village, the ash grove, the hill of promises, the field of forgotten names. Ahead, the dark gate waited. He cleared his throat. I assume knocking is unnecessary. The darkness answered in his own voice. Unnecessary, yes. Aldrin closed his eyes briefly. Of course IT does that. The gate rippled. A figure stepped from IT. Not Elaun. Not the lady. Not the keeper. I looked like Aldrin. Almost. A little taller. A little straighter. Better cloak. Cleaner boots. Frankly irritating. The false Aldrin smiled with calm confidence. You have walked far. I have been reminded. You found the name. One of them. You can end the road, possibly, or save IT. The false man extended one hand. In his palm lay the blue cloth scrap Aldrin had given the ferryman. His beginning, fresh, untorn, bright as twilight. Aldrin's chest tightened. That's gone. Nothing is gone here, only held. By whom? By need. The false Aldrin stepped closer. Take IT back. Speak Eloan's name. Break the curse. At dawn, you return to ordinary roads, ordinary trade, ordinary years. That sounds suspiciously pleasant. IT is deserved. There it was. Kindness first. Aldrin looked at the scrap. He wanted IT, not because it was valuable, because IT had belonged to the first day. He believed himself capable of becoming more than a frightened son with debts in his pockets. The false Aldrin's voice softened. "You have done enough." The phrase returned again, familiar as a hook under bread. Aldrin touched the folded parchment hidden inside his tunic. His roomy name, Aldrin, who kept walking and remembered mercy. What happens to the village? Freed. And the lost? Released where? The false man's smile thinned. Elsewhere. Aldrin nodded slowly. That's the trouble with vague mercy. IT often hides a broom. The darkness behind the false Aldrin stirred. Then choose sacrifice. The scene changed. The gate became the village square. Blue lanterns glowed. Children slept safely behind shutters. The sewing woman held her needle again. Harrow laughed beside a fire. The lady stood beneath ash trees, unburdened. Eloin's name rang gently in the air, and Aldrin stood at the center of the road, motionless, pale, becoming stone, a new milestone, his full name carved deep. The false Aldrin spoke beside him. Give yourself to the road. Become its keeper. Let Eloin rest. Let the village remain. Let every wanderer find passage. Aldrin stared at the vision. IT was noble, terribly noble, the sort of ending bards loved because bards rarely had to become milestones themselves. That is the sacrifice, yes, forever, until forgotten. That's not better. It is good. Aldrin remembered the keeper's warning. Do not mistake sacrifice for goodness. Some chains praise themselves as noble. He stepped back. No. The vision flickered. The false Aldrin's face hardened. You would refuse freedom and sacrifice both. I am beginning to suspect those are not the only choices. They are the ancient choices. Ancient things can be very wrong. Look at old cheese. The false man's eyes darkened. For a moment, the darkness behind him showed countless faces pressed into it. Travelers, villagers, names half remembered, all waiting, all tired. The road spoke now, not in Aldrin's voice, but in many voices woven together. Every bargain needs payment. Maybe, Aldrin sighed, but payment is not the same as feeding. The road trembled. He drew the folded parchment from his tunic, but did not open IT. I will not end mercy. I will not become another chain, and I will not let you keep pretending hunger is duty. The dark gate widened. Cold poured over him. The false Aldrin vanished. In his place stood a tall shape made of pale stones. Ribbons, bells, broken keys, lost needles, feathers, coins, and scraps of cloth. Every toll ever taken seemed bound into IT. Its face was a hollow milestone. Its mouth opened. The final bell rang from inside. Aldrin nearly fell. The sound pressed memories from him. His father turning away, his first coin missing, the mule refusing the road, the old woman's warning, the ferryman's hand, the lady's sorrow. Eloin's name, his own. One by one, the road tried to weigh them. One by one, he held them. Not tightly, carefully. There was a difference. In a very old and eccentric custom from mountain passes, travelers would whisper their destination into a pebble and carry IT under the tongue, believing nitrogen monoxide spirit could mislead them while the stone knew the way. Aldrin had nitrogen monoxide pebble, and putting a P under his tongue seemed both undignified and a choking hazard. Still, he'd pressed the P in his pocket and let that tiny, ridiculous thing remind him. Not every guide had to be grand. He spoke clearly. Eloin. The stone shape recoiled, but Aldrin did not stop there. Eloin was remembered wrongly. Ilawan opened a way when nitrogen monoxide way remained. Ilawan is not this hunger. The road shrieked without sound. Ribbons snapped loose from its body. Keys fell, needles flashed. Feathers rose, the dark gate split, revealing a faint gray line beyond IT. Not sunrise, not yet, but the idea of sunrise. Aldrin lifted the unopened parchment. And I am Aldrin, who kept walking and remembered mercy. The parchment unfolded by itself. Its letters glowed warm gold. The final bell rang again. This time, it sounded cracked. The road's shape bent toward him, pleading now in 100 voices. Pay. Aldrin stepped forward. Nitrogen monoxide. Then choose. I choose remembrance without chains. The words seemed too simple, too small, yet the road shuddered as though struck. Behind Aldrin, faint footsteps gathered. The sewing woman, the hunter, the wood carver, the cage-bearer, the silent travelers, the villagers, the lady beneath ash trees, even the ferryman, standing without his boat, holding Aldrin's blue scrap. One by one, they spoke, not loudly, not dramatically. Each sighed the same name. Ilawan. Ilawan. The dark gate began to dissolve. The road beneath Aldrin's feet warmed. The stone shape collapsed into dust, and from within that dust rose a softer light. Neither blue nor silver, but pale as dawn on clean water. Aldrin reached out. The ferryman placed the blue cloth scrap into his hand, not as payment returned, as witness. Beyond the broken gate, the road continued toward morning, and somewhere ahead, the last bell waited to decide whether an ancient hunger could remember, at last, how to become a gift again. The broken gate dissolved behind Aldrin like smoke ashamed of itself. For several moments, nothing moved. The road lay quiet beneath the pale light gathering ahead, and the travelers stood along its edges. Nitrogen monoxide, longer silent in the old way. Their stillness felt different now, less like being trapped, more like people listening after a storm, wondering whether the roof had survived. Aldrin held the blue cloth scrap in one hand and the unfolded parchment in the other. Both felt warm. This seemed impossible. Naturally, but by now impossible, had become less a condition and more a local habit. The lady stood nearest the fading darkness. Her silver hair stirred gently. "Say IT again," she whispered. Aldrin looked toward the road ahead. Ilawan. The name traveled farther this time. It ran along the stones, passed beneath roots, crossed unseen water, entered the vanished inn, brushed the village well, woke the lily, loosened ribbons from ash branches, and returned carrying echoes. Ilawan, Ilawan. The road brightened. Not fully, not safely yet, but like a person opening their eyes after a long fever. The ferryman stepped forward. Without the black water around him, he looked smaller, older, almost relieved. "I have kept too much," he sighed. He opened his coat. From its lining fell keys, coins, needles, feathers, buttons, ribbons, locks of hair, folded letters, carved birds, and hundreds of cloth scraps in every color imaginable. They did not strike the ground, they floated. Each object glowed faintly. The old wood carver laughed softly as one ash bird flew to his palm. The sewing woman caught her needle and held it to her heart. The cage-bearer opened his empty cage, and this time birds poured out. Black, white, brown, speckled, some nitrogen monoxide, larger than moths, all fluttering upward into the thinning night. Aldrin watched his blue scrap drift once, then settle back in his hand. The ferryman bowed his head. No more toll. Then how will people cross? Aldrin asked. The ferryman smiled, tired and real. By asking? That sounded almost too simple. Then again, most good things did, until people improved them into disasters. Across the road, Harrow appeared, leaning on his bow. Well, he said, that went better than the time I tried to trap moonlight in a cheesecloth. Aldrin blinked. You did what? Young Boots. Of course. A laugh spread among the travelers, small at first, uncertain, then warmer. Even the lady smiled. The laughter mattered. Aldrin could feel it shook. Dust from the road's old rules. It made the night less solemn, less hungry. Fear dislikes laughter unless it is the cruel kind. Gentle laughter leaves fear standing in the corner, overdressed and irrelevant. The distant bell rang again. Only once. This time, IT did not command. IT asked. The lady turned toward the ash grove. Her ribbons were coming undone. All across the branches, strips of white cloth released themselves and floated down like slow snow. As they touched the stones, each became a whispered name. Some were remembered by villagers, some by travelers, some by nitrogen monoxide, one living. But the road held them softly now, not as payment, but as witness. Aldrin felt the parchment in his hand change. The writing shifted. Aldrin, who kept walking and remembered mercy. Below IT, new words appeared. Mercy is not a chain. He smiled faintly. Good addition. The parchment folded itself into a small square and slipped into his palm. The lady approached him. You have broken what I could not. I had help. YEC. And luck. Yes. And one P. She looked confused. He took the dry pea from his pocket. For a moment the lady stared. Then she began to AUGH. Not the soft laugh from the grove. A real laugh, bright, startled, almost young. Keep IT, she sighed. Small things embarrass large sorrows. That, Aldrin decided, was worth remembering. The pale light ahead widened. The road, nitrogen monoxide, longer pulled east like a command. Instead, IT opened in many directions, thin silver paths stretching toward places unseen. A cottage where someone waited to say goodbye. A battlefield where names had been lost. A cradle beside a frightened mother. A marsh where an old crossing had sunk beneath reeds. Elone's gift was not gone. IT had changed. Nitrogen monoxide, longer one hungry road. Now IT was passage where passage was needed, appearing only when called by memory freely given. The lady stepped into the center of the road. Her feet touched the stones, and for the first time she cast a shadow. IT was small, human, beautiful. She looked down at IT, as though seeing an old friend returned from war. The villagers began appearing behind her, one by one, blue lanterns in hand. The headman came last, his carved bone chain now cracked open, its pieces blank. What happens to the village? Aldrin asked. The headman looked toward the horizon. At dawn, maps may find use again. And will people stay? Some will leave, some will complain either way. That sounds properly alive. The headman nodded solemnly. Complaining is a civic foundation. The final remnants of the dark gate sank into the road. From them rose a figure of pale dawnlight. Ilawan, nitrogen monoxide longer unfinished. Not exactly human, not exactly spirit, but whole enough to be seen without sorrow sharpening every edge. She looked at Aldrin. You carried the name without owning IT. I was warned not to collect strange things. You collected many. YES, but nervously. Eloun smiled. Then she turned to the gathered travelers. No toll. Nitrogen monoxide binding. Nitrogen monoxide for getting by force. Those who need passage may ask. Those who are not ready may rest. Those who wish to leave may follow dawn. The road sighed. A sound like rain finally reaching thirsty ground. Aldrin felt something lift from his shoulders. Not all weariness, not all grief, just the part that had been placed there by the road without permission. The first true bird song trembled somewhere beyond the mist. Everyone heard IT. Everyone turned. The eastern sky, still hidden by trees and hills, began to pale. The lady closed her eyes. The ferryman sat down on a milestone and wept quietly, though he smiled while doing IT. Harrow removed the red wool from one boot, considered IT, then wrapped IT back again. Nitrogen monoxide scents becoming reckless. Aldrin laughed, and as the ancient curse loosened at last, the road beneath them changed from bone-white to soft gray stone. Ordinary enough to walk, strange enough never to forget. Ahead, morning waited. Behind, the night rode nitrogen monoxide, longer hunted names, and Aldrin, still tired, still afraid, still very much hoping his mule had not eaten expensive inventory, began the last walk toward sunrise. The last walk before sunrise began quietly. No command pulled Aldrin forward now. Nitrogen monoxide bell dragged shadows from unwilling feet. Nitrogen monoxide flowers turned their pale faces to watch him with botanical judgment, which was a relief because being evaluated by plants had never suited his temperament. The road ahead had changed. Its stones were nitrogen monoxide, longer smooth and bone white. They were gray now, uneven, damp with dew, and touched here and there by moss. Almost ordinary. Almost. But little almost mattered. Beside him walked the lady, casting her small human shadow. Behind them came villagers, travelers, and wanderers whose faces slowly gathered color as the dark loosened its grip. Some spoke softly. Some wept. Some only looked at their hands, as though surprised to still possess them. Harrow walked with his bow over one shoulder and both boots wrapped in red wool. Aldrin glanced down. Keeping both? One must respect tradition. You said it worked poorly. Poorly's not never. Fair. The ferryman walked without boat or pole, carrying a bundle of returned tokens. Whenever someone recognized an object, he handed it over with awkward care. He seemed unused to giving things back, like a tax collector discovering generosity and not trusting the symptoms. The sewing woman had threaded her needle again. She did not sew cloth, though she stitched names onto a long strip of linen, each one appearing in silver thread after IT was spoken aloud. The cage-bearer walked beneath a cloud of small birds. They perched on his shoulders, cage, and hood. He looked overwhelmed but pleased, which was understandable. Sudden bird management is rarely covered in travel preparations. The road curved between low hills. Mist gathered in hollows. But now IT behaved like proper mist, drifting, thinning, minding its own damp business. Aldrin breathed deeply. For the first time all night, he smelled dawn, wet grass, cold stone, wood smoke from distant hearths, and somewhere faint but unmistakable. Mule. He stopped. His heart leapt. Then from beyond the hedge came a familiar bray, rude and magnificent. Aldrin hurried forward. There stood his mule beside the original dirt track, packs intact, ears tilted backward, as though personally offended by every event since sunset. "You absolute philosopher," Aldrin said. The mule stared. "I know. You were right." The mule blinked slowly. "Do not look so pleased." Harrow leaned on the hedge. "Fine beast, judgmental beast, best kind." Aldrin checked the packs. Nothing ruined, nothing stolen. The blue cloth bolt remained dry. The mule had somehow avoided mud, wolves, spirits, and business loss. Truly, the creature's survival instincts deserved a chapel. An eccentric thought occurred to Aldrin. In some districts, mules were believed to see crossroads spirits because they refused to step forward at inconvenient times. People mocked this until their horses lead them into bogs. Then everyone became very respectful of mules, as they should. The road behind them shimmered. The night path still existed, but nitrogen monoxide longer as a single pale trap. IT branched softly through the thinning mist, appearing only where someone spoke a name with need rather than fear. Elowen stood at the edge of the gray stones. The lady faced her. Neither spoke at first. Centuries seemed to pass between them in silence. Then the lady bowed. "I remembered badly." Elowen touched her shoulder. "You remembered through terror. Terror knots even loving hands." The lady wept then, not loudly, not dramatically, just enough for her shadow to tremble beside her feet. The headman approached with the cracked bone chain. "What shall we tell our children?" Elowen looked toward the brightening sky. "Tell them roads are gifts, not debts. Tell them names are carried, not owned. Tell them gratitude should open doors, not lock them." Aldrin nodded. Also perhaps mention not following strange roads without asking basic questions first. Harrow coughed. "Advice rarely works." True. Stories work slightly better. The first sunlight touched the hilltops. At once the remaining blue lanterns went out, not extinguished. Satisfied, the village appeared in the distance, nitrogen monoxide, longer hidden. Its roofs were plain gray. ITS square small, ITS well ordinary stone. Smoke rose properly from chimneys. A dog barked twice and continued, apparently free from supernatural reconsideration. The villagers laughed at that more than it deserved. But after a long curse, even an overconfident dog becomes comedy. One by one, the travelers began choosing paths. Some walked toward the village. Some followed faint silver branches of road that appeared only long enough to welcome them. Some simply sat in the grass and watched the sunrise with the stunned expression of people who had forgotten morning was not a rumor. The sewing woman tied off her silver thread and handed the linen strip to the headman. "Keep this where children can read it. And if they forget, they will." Then read IT again. The ferryman approached Aldrin. In his hand lay the blue cloth scrap. Aldrin frowned. "I thought you already returned that." "I returned witness. This is choice." The scrap rested between them. Aldrin looked at IT. His beginning. His old luck. Then he looked at the road, at Elowen, at the village, at his mule pretending indifference while clearly listening. He took the scrap and tied IT gently to the mule's harness. "There," he sighed. "Let wisdom carry IT." The mule snorted. A rude but valid guardian. Elowen smiled. The sun lifted higher. The night road faded from sight, not vanishing exactly, but becoming unavailable to careless eyes. A good change, Aldrin felt. Some roads should require sincerity before appearing. The lady stepped onto the ordinary dirt track. For a heartbeat, she looked almost like any traveler, tired, relieved, uncertain what to do with freedom. Then she turned to Aldrin. "Where will you go?" "Home, if the mule permits." And then he looked at the brightening fields, markets, villages, places with too many questions and not enough answers. "You will tell the tale? Carefully. Will they believe you?" Aldrin smiled. Some will laugh. Some will improve IT by adding dragons. Harrow brightened. Were there dragons? Nitrogen monoxide. Could have used one. Nitrogen monoxide. IT could not. The last bell rang. Not from Tower OR Gate. From everywhere lightly touched by dawn. It was gentle now, no longer choosing or closing, only saying that night had ended, and whatever remained must learn to live in morning. Aldrin placed one hand on his mule's neck. Warm, solid, wonderful. Behind him, the road that had appeared only at night softened into memory. Ahead lay the familiar world. Muddy lanes, late deliveries, suspicious innkeepers, onion-selling elders, and ordinary troubles waiting with open arms like relatives who never learned timing. He began walking. The mule followed, and as sunlight spread across the fields, Aldrin did not look back, not because he feared what called behind him, but because for once nothing did. By full morning, the road was gone, not hidden in mist, not waiting beneath moonlight, gone in the very ordinary way things are gone when daylight has nitrogen monoxide, patience for mystery. Aldrin stood at the edge of a muddy lane with his mule beside him. Looking over fields he almost recognized. A low stone wall ran crookily toward a copse of trees. Crows argued over something in the distance. Smoke rose from a farmhouse chimney, and somewhere a rooster delivered its opinion of sunrise with unnecessary confidence. The world had returned, rude, damp, practical, and blessedly imperfect. Aldrin patted the mule's neck. Well, that was unpleasantly educational. The mule flicked one ear. "Yes, I agree. We shall avoid moonlit roads with strong personalities." The blue cloth scrap tied to the harness stirred in a light breeze. For a moment, just one, IT seemed brighter than ordinary cloth. Then IT was only cloth again. He found the village by noon. Not the hidden village, the first village. The one where the old woman had arranged onions like military formations and warned him not to travel east. She was still there, sitting beneath a market awning, peeling an apple with a knife so small it looked personally offended by fruit. When she saw Aldrin, she lifted one eyebrow. "You walked, IT." Aldrin stopped. "You knew?" "I knew no UGH. You might have explained." "I did. You said, 'You've walked roads,' and..." He opened his mouth, then closed. IT. Fair enough. Old women in villages had a gift for being technically correct in the most irritating way possible. She looked at the mule. Beast had sense. Please don't encourage him. The mule snorted. The woman noticed the blue scrap. Her face softened. "What did you bring back?" Aldrin considered. Not proof. Not exactly. The pea remained in his pocket. The parchment rested inside his tunic, folded and warm. Elone's name lived carefully in his memory. "A story," he said. The woman nodded. "Good. Better than a curse." That evening, Aldrin stayed in the village. He paid for stable space, checked every pack twice, sold 3 lengths of wool, and accepted supper from a household that believed merchants became less suspicious after soup. After the meal, villagers gathered near the hearth. Someone had heard he'd taken the east road. Someone else said he had vanished. Before moonrise, a boy claimed the mule had returned, alone at midnight, and judged everyone silently. That part was probably true. Aldrin waited until the room quieted. Then he told them. Not everything. Some things lose shape when handled too roughly. He told them of a road that appeared only at night, of silent travelers, a nameless inn, a ferryman, a village missing from maps, a lady beneath ash trees, and an old power named Elowan who had first opened paths out of mercy. He told them the road was not to be feared like a monster, nor desired like treasure. It was to be remembered rightly. A road is a gift when it opens for the lost. It becomes a chain when gratitude turns into debt. He did not mention every sorrow. He did mention the crowned rooster. That detail caused strong discussion. One farmer insisted crowning poultry was foolish. Another side his neighbor's rooster already behaved like nobility and might as well receive ceremony. The old woman with onions laughed so hard she spilled cider on her apron. Good. Laughter helped the story breathe. In the weeks that followed, Aldrin carried the tale from village to village. He told it in market squares, beside winter fires, under awnings during rain. People listened in different ways. Some leaned forward. Some crossed themselves. Some pretended disbelief while quietly asking whether blue lanterns were expensive. The tale changed, of course. Stories always do. In one town, the ferryman became 7 feet tall. In another, Harrow fought moonlit stags with a spoon. Somehow, by late autumn, one version included a dragon, despite Aldrin's repeated objections. But Elowan's name remained. That mattered. Wherever the name was spoken kindly, small mercies began appearing. A widow dreamed of her husband and woke smiling. A lost child found a footpath home beneath moonlight. A midwife, crossing flooded fields, saw pale stones rise just long enough beneath her feet. Nitrogen monoxide toll. Nitrogen monoxide bargain. Nitrogen monoxide hunger. Only passage. And sometimes, when travelers walked late under a clear moon, they saw a faint gray road beside their own. Not inviting exactly, not demanding, simply available. Those who did not need IT passed safely by. Those who did sometimes found their way. As for Aldrin, he remained a merchant, mostly. He still arrived late, still argued with innkeepers, still lost money on impractical purchases when customers told sad stories. His mule remained wiser than him, and never allowed him to forget IT. Yet something in Aldrin had changed. He nitrogen monoxide longer believed roads were only lines between places. Some roads lead through grief, some through memory, some through the uncomfortable territory between who a man had been called and who he chose to become. Years later, when his hair had silver at the temples, and apprentices complained that he told the same tales too often, Aldrin would smile and say repetition was how names stayed warm. Then, on certain evenings, he would remove a folded parchment from inside a wooden box. The ink had never faded. Aldrin, who kept walking and remembered mercy below IT. Mercy is not a chain. He would read IT once, fold IT again, and listen to the night beyond the shutters. Sometimes he heard nothing. Sometimes a bell rang very far away, not calling him, only reminding him that somewhere for someone lost, a road might be appearing beneath the moon. And if that traveler walked with care, asked with humility, and carried names gently, the road would not take them. It would guide them. Word count 1045. Now the tale softens, as all roads must when the walking is done. The fields grow quiet beneath a calmer sky. The mule lowers its head. The last bell fades into the distance, and the strange road rests, where only memory can find it. No shadow reaches now. Nitrogen monoxide voice calls from behind. The night has become only night again, deep and gentle, with room enough for sleep. You can imagine Aldrin's story settling like warm cloth folded beside a hearth. The danger has passed. The names have been spoken kindly. The old bargain has loosened, and every tired traveler has somewhere safe to turn. Breathe slowly. There is nitrogen monoxide. Need to hurry down any road tonight. The moon may shine outside, or rain may tap softly at the world beyond your window. But here the path is peaceful. Each stone is cool and steady. Each step grows lighter. Even the old mysteries have lowered their voices, content to wait beyond the edge of dreams. And somewhere far away, not near enough to trouble you, a silver road appears for someone who truly needs it. It opens without hunger. It shines without command. It carries nitrogen monoxide debt. Only a quiet promise that the lost are not always alone. So rest now. Let the lanterns dim. Let the bells sleep. Let the story drift away like mist over morning fields, leaving only the soft thought that mercy can be remembered, names can be carried gently, and even the longest night may end beside a familiar road under a sky slowly filling with dawn.